Not too long ago, Josh Pate from The Late Kick did an interview with Alabama head football coach Nick Saban. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up and highlight some parts of that interview is that in that interview, I learned a couple things from Nick Saban that confirms a couple of points that I've made about the Alabama football team over the last few months, including the hire of the strength and conditioning staff, Dave Ballou and Matt Rhea. And also the point of Nick Saban having confidence in defensive coordinator Pete Golding and how the defense's main issue last year was execution. So if you want to learn how basically Nick Saban agreed with my assessment on those two things, or at least specifically on that Pete Golding issue, then stick around. I'm going to tell you about it. On the first point, with the hiring of Dave Ballou and Matt Rhea, Josh asked Nick Saban a question of, how do you basically make sure that they're the best in the business? You know, you lost Scott Cochran. Scott Cochran left and went to Georgia. I made a video about this as well. And I was asking, did Georgia or Kirby Smart weaken Alabama by getting one of Nick Saban's longest running coaches on the staff? And ultimately, what a lot of us realize with Nick Saban is that he's the one who runs the show. It won't end without him. He goes out and he makes adjustments. He gets the coaches that he needs to continue the success and even improve in areas that we didn't see coming because we got complacent and we were just happy with what we had. And I think that was something that happened with Scott Cochran. Internally, Nick Saban said this, internally, Alabama was becoming more sports science centric. And honestly, Scott Cochran is not that type of guy. That's not what he was doing. Scott Cochran was more of the old way, the traditional way of doing strength and conditioning, doing all these extreme tasks, yelling a lot, getting all these crazy motivational tactics to get players to do more, to lift more weights, to run an extra mile, which was good for the time. And I'm pretty sure it has, some merit in making the players tougher in some ways and making them last longer. But ultimately, what we've seen over these past few years is that the Alabama players were wearing down. They were seeing much more injuries, especially at the second level of the defense with the linebackers. Players just weren't recovering the same way. And with the game getting faster and bigger and stronger players, when they collide against each other, is leaving lasting damage, I think, at a faster rate. And I think that's really harming these players. So those old strength and conditioning methods, I just honestly believe they're outdated. And I think Scott Cochran wasn't really ready to take that next step in the sports science field. So NFL guys were evaluating the Alabama process for sports science. To me, it sounds like Scott Cochran wasn't really there yet to receive that process. So his departure was actually very timely. Kirby Smart did Alabama a favor, I believe, ultimately, in pulling Scott Cochran away and allowing Alabama to go ahead and move forward with people who know what they're doing in the field of sports science. And so Nick Saban said this specifically. This is a quote from the interview. In talking about how they're doing their process, he says, we had guys who were still doing it the way we did it 10 years ago and who had progressed.
Who was still sort of doing things the way we did them 10 years ago and who had sort of progressed.
And I want to focus on the word progress there because he specifically said the word progressed. It would have been different if he said, guys who did it the way we did it 10 years ago and who decided to do something different. But he said progressed, assuming and meaning that they're doing something that's better than the old. And Scott Cochran wasn't doing that yet. And so we had to go get somebody who was doing some of that progressing, some of that innovating. And if you want to learn more about what that looks like, and you can go watch my video on the topic, did Kirby Smart week in Alabama? But that's really, really interesting for me. And he said he heard about Matt Rhea and David Ballou for the first time, from their experience at IMG Academy, because Alabama recruits from there pretty heavily, get some top players. And the players were really excited about getting those guys. They actually recommended those guys from their time at IMG Academy. And the players at Alabama now have responded really well and are excited about the changes that are implemented by Ballou and Rhea. I think that's really cool. Now I'm going to get into that Pete Golding topic. One of the less fun but interesting to engage with conversations from this past year as people saw the Alabama defense not quite live up to the outrageous standard that it usually has, which is amazingly pretty close to the number one defense just about every year. And this year it's like, they were a lowly top 20 defense, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? Thinking of a top 20 defense as lowly. But Josh Pate asked Nick Saban, you don't have guys on your staff that you're not confident in. So you obviously have Pete Golding here when people were kind of aggravated about him and assuming that the defense is not doing well. So you obviously have confidence in him. So what has to be better?
We didn't execute very well last year.
We didn't execute very well last year, man, and that means a lot because that confirms what I said all fall, was that the plays, there's nothing wrong with them. They're calling the plays that they need to call. The players aren't doing what they're supposed to. Plenty of times, especially with those true freshman linebackers, they weren't running to their assignment fast enough. They were letting the flat get open. They weren't covering the running back because they were hesitating. They weren't hitting the gaps where they needed to. And if they had did that, the play would have worked out just fine. So the play calling from the defensive standpoint was actually really good. The issue was the execution from the players. And some of that comes with, coaching too and making sure they're getting that right. But at the end of the day, a coach can only call plays. And at a certain point, the players have to do it. And he went on, and you may think, well, that execution point could mean everybody. It could mean the staff. It could mean the players, which I agree it could be that. But he continued to harp on then the mindset of players. He says they had to get used to being uncomfortable. He said the players were used to being comfortable. They're used to having things go their way and playing when they wanted to and kind of doing things how they expected to happen. But these players had to adjust to doing things differently, not just being the big man on campus and getting away with doing whatever they want to on the football field. And they had to establish a culture of accountability, making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to. And I think the Alabama defense had a lot of trouble doing that last year, whether that's from lack of leadership or guys not stepping up to doing what they're supposed to do. But they had to develop habits that will make them successful. And these things I'm saying right now, I'm quoting them loosely from what Nick Saban said in this interview. So if you want to see it, go check it out. It's right here on YouTube on a 24/7 Sports YouTube channel with Josh Pate, a great guy. And Nick Saban said they have to know that there's a price for winning. There's a price for leadership. There's a price for being elite.
There's a price to pay for winning. There's a price to pay for being a leader.
You have to work, you have to give, you have to actually do what it takes to make that happen. You can't just show up and then it happens. And I think a lot of people think that because you recruit these talented players in every recruiting class, that means you're automatically going to have success. And that's just not the way it works. You can have plenty of 5 stars and still end up having a failing season. Look at some of these other teams that do that. They recruit really well and they don't have the same amount of success as Alabama. It's because it takes more than just bringing in a ranking, inserting them into the roster, and expecting that to change things. And so players have to pay the price. And on defense last year, the players obviously weren't doing that. And as I said, I made that execution point all last season, yet people didn't want to believe me. Now that Nick Saban himself has said it, do you believe me now? Do you now see that Pete Golding isn't necessarily the problem? It's just that we now have some things to work on, and I'm interested to see how we move forward, especially with healthy players. I think the combination of having Pete Golding, Dave Ballou, and Matt Rhea together, and hopefully they had enough time to implement some of the things that they needed to get those adjustments going with making healthy players and getting the defense on the right page. I want to see that fruit, and I want to see them have the time to make it happen. And this is going to be great down the line, assuming that we make it out of 2020. It's looking pretty rough right now. Every week there's something crazy going on. So everybody, let's stick together, unify, and take care of each other, pray for each other, please. So it's just a lot. But anyway, thank you all for sitting through me talking through these topics and basically uplift myself for saying the things that I said. But I also want to open it up to you. Like, do you agree with Nick Saban's assessments on these things? What is something you want to see from the strength and conditioning program, from Pete Golding, whatever it may be? If you enjoyed this, subscribe to the channel. Please click the notification button next to the subscribe button and then click it again, or you don't necessarily have to click it again, but it will bring up a drop down that says you can get all notifications, personalized notifications, all. Go ahead and turn on all of them. Do that and make sure you have on the settings in your phone notifications that you can receive from apps, because that'll stop you from getting notifications too. I just want to educate you on that. I've been doing the YouTube thing for a while, so I know all the little ins and outs of certain things. So if you ever want to know some of that, let me know. But thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.